All righty. Call to order the February 21st meeting of the Budget Finance and Growth Committee. Just as typical thing we've done, it was a practice started by, at least from my knowledge, started when I was on the committee by our Vice President, Board Member Bolton here. So just gonna go around the room. We'll start with Michelle, and then we'll roll around. Roll around to Rob, who'll tell folks who are online how to participate.
Great. I'm Michelle Jones, Federation of Teachers Local 1520.
And then, ask me Local 232.
Michelle Harris, payroll supervisor.
Good morning, Cody Hutchins, contract analyst.
Good day, Shauna Murphy, superintendent.
Good morning, Jim Crossett, board member.
Brandon Craig, board member.
Eve Bolton, board member.
Kevin Ashley, Director of Financial Reporting and Transparency.
Michael Guston, Assistant Treasurer.
Jennifer Wagner, treasurer.
Good morning, Lauren Roberts, Chief Audit Executive.
Good morning, Rob Wilson, technician. If you'd like to speak during the speaking in public session, please click the hand icon. We will invite you over. We will ask you your name and association in the district, and we will invite you at the end of the meeting to speak for 2 minutes. Thank you.
All right. So as the chair pro tem, since last month, we were not be able to be, we did not have the presence of our newest member to Budget and Finance and Growth, Mr. Crossett here. We did not make a selection for chair of the committee. So I think the first things in order on old business is to select chair. I'm happy to do it again, but again, it's open to anyone who would want to be chair of the committee. Thoughts from board members?
I think we could probably have a co-chair situation. What do you think?
I don't know that we've done it on any other committee, but I don't
Is there any rule?
know if there's any rule against it. But
Let's do it because I'm figuring that Finance Committee, these three right here, are gonna have to build a majority of fiscal responsibility in these next few months. So the more we can work together, I think the better it will be. Because these three are gonna have to be three votes that treasurer and the superintendent can count on in some of these difficult decisions. You sure we could do a tri-chair too, if you'd like to?
I'm happy not to be chair.
Wise decision, wise decision.
Ready. The next bit of old business is just an update on the treasurer search. We did a series of second round interviews on Wednesday. That included meeting with members of the audit committee as well as staff in the treasurer's office and leadership from several of our unions. And so, and then the board itself. And so we will hope to have some exciting news soon as to the ultimate selection in that process. But again, I think it was a great opportunity to get members of folks who were who've worked with or who've been connected with our treasurer's office an opportunity to view the two finalists. Any other thoughts from the other board members on this? Jeff?
Yeah, I want to thank board member Craig for your leadership in organizing that whole search and making it smooth and reasonable and approachable. So thank you for that.
I'll second that. That's great. And that's off our list once we make a
Let's make a select-
action item. So that's part of the chart that can go away.
Yeah, it's a task the board will have completed once we make a selection in front of the public there.
Superintendent may want to say something.
I am very grateful for the process from A to Z. Thank you very much.
Treasurer, do you have anything to add on? Just
She's allowed to
as
speak.
whoever is selected will be her successor.
I'm going to, on Tuesday, I'm going to start counting down.
Excellent.
All righty. The last bit of old business is carryover from the last couple of meetings or a couple of policy things. I think they are listed in the monthly update slides. So we can certainly cover them now, or we can cover them when we get to that part. I think it's fine if we
Do it now.
let's go ahead and hit them now.
Slide 41, Rob.
41.
41, please.
41 out of 98. No, I'm just kidding.
Um, well, Rob's pulling up. I'll give a little bit of a point of preference here for me, but I'm working on recording some videos for a presentation, and the person told me, "Well, just start where this slide is," and never told me where that slide was in the deck. So first 5 minutes was going through like 100 slides to figure out where it was. But all right, so new policies. Again, these are policies that we've discussed in December and January that we're bringing back for further discussion here. The first one again is the cash balances. Turn it over to Treasurer to give us a little bit more background.
Yeah, so we're trying to look for best practice in terms of how much cash reserve to keep on hand to support daily operations of the district. And we made a recommendation to go with 60 days or try to build up to 60 days. Feedback we got was a little nervous. And so we heard last Monday night that either they come back with a smaller phase in or slower phase in, so it has less impact on the annual budget, or take it out and put it as part of a new money levy. And so we wanted to have that conversation here as to what does the finance committee think is the best practice moving forward.
All right, so open up to board members for thoughts.
I think I like the idea of gradually building it up over the next few years. Possibly, I think the number you've suggested was like 12 million a year to get us there.
That was to do 60 days over 5 year period, so we can take it down to a 10-year, maybe 6 or even smaller than that. But what concerns me about the future is the language that's in the new budget bill. I think our state funding is going to continue to go down, and that's going to put more and more pressure on the property tax level, and it's going to put more pressure on our current cash reserves. So if we act too slowly, it may not be helpful to us, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think the 5-year plan looks good to me. I think we've got some risk and, we need to have some protection for the district. So it would be my view.
I think a gradual buildup, but I also believe very firmly in building it into a new money levy as part of our efforts regarding operations. And especially, I think that's important if we are going for new money as early as I think we are going for new money. So I would suggest the 60 days seems like a challenge without doing it as part of a levy.
Oh, absolutely.
So even over 5 years, I think that's going to be hard. And I think in this election, in this budget, the more I'm wondering, as you point out, about the state, and now wondering too about the federal government. This might not be the best year to start, but we'll see.
So all right, now let's speak specifically about fiscal year 26, because we're in the middle of the budget cycle. We haven't kicked off central office yet. And this has an impact on how we move forward. So are we saying postpone fiscal year 26 or use a smaller number? Because whatever number we put there is going to have to be a corresponding cut in current spending.
I think we should postpone just because I don't think any of us know exactly what our reality is going to be in the state or the federal, or even the growth plan and everything else that we're doing or needing to do to change the way we do business. But I may be in the minority on that.
So I have a concern with postponing in whole. And in part, I would say that I think we still need to do something to show a commitment to doing it. And part of my frustration with that thought is that we ended the last cycle by balancing our budget by going into our cash balance. And even if we were this year to say we're not going to strive to do that, I think we will still probably end up somewhere in the range of having to be very close to doing that. And I would rather us have a cushion of maybe 2 million or 3 million as that first year, and then every year after fitting up to getting us there, that we could always come back and say, this year we can't do this because of these factors, than to not plan for it, and then we still dip into our cash balance, which would take us even lower than we already are.
See, the thing about that is, Ohio Revised Code, I think it's 5507 or 5705, one of those, .412 is the 412 certificate where
Mhm.
I have to sign to certify anything that's over a $500,000 contract or 1% of prior year revenues. I have to certify that that funding is there for that time period. And so as we're heading into negotiations with
Yeah.
3-year contracts. If we show a forecast with a negative balance in that 3-year window, I can't certify anything in those future years. And so I'm concerned about even certifying a budget if we're dipping into prior year cash. So it's going to be a very painful year in terms of budget building and then the impact of that in operations of fund in the year of 26. So
Yeah.
I just want to put all the information on the table. So when we make any decision, we're doing it with all
And
inputs.
and again, I think if we even did a, what is, I'm trying to do the math off the top of my head here because, yeah, but even if we were committing to a $500,000 of just dedicated into increasing the cash balance, or $1 million to increase the cash balance, which again, I think is still a big number given all the other factors we have to do.
Mhm.
I think if we don't do something, and if we haven't pledged to do something, it's nothing to hold us to doing it the next year.
So I'm sorry, did you say a $500,000 or $500,000?
$500,000.
Million, okay.
Million. No.
There's a $500,000, it's 4 million.
No, no, $500,000.
So, just want clarity, okay. So,
I support Brandon. I think we have to do something intentional that shows we're doing something to increase those reserves. Whether it's 500,000 or $1 million, I think we have to show that we're trying to be as prudent as we can regarding our reserves.
I figured I'd be in the minority on this, but I would also say on that, I think we can show that in the policy. Make a commitment in the policy as to what year to start. Because as Treasurer points out, we are in the midst of negotiations that should have been concluded last year. And she's got to sign off and we've got to be able to do what we need to do. I just think that money is so tight and everything is so precarious in all directions. I think you can maybe make that commitment and mean it. I think we mean it. But make it in the policy as to when it would start, rather than this fiscal year coming up as some sort of symbolic gesture. Because I don't think we're gonna have $2 million to put aside anywhere.
I think though, if we do that, my only thing would be to say, we would make also in that policy that we will not use the cash balance for fiscal year 2026 to make it balance. Because I think, again, we keep eating into it as a means to make, because we don't have revenue equaling
Okay. It's a good
expenditures.
compromise.
you have a resolution that already says that, but
Mhm.
yes, we can put it in the policy. Now, I just wanted to, Mike did a really interesting calculation, the other day that the reason why we're where we are, other than the 8-year cycle that we're doing, is that $48 million levy that we passed for the first time with new money in 2016. The buying power of that 48 million is now 64 million. So that's why we're putting such a strain on,
Say that
I need
again.
battery.
Vice versa.
See,
Your
that was
battery,
so
Rob.
exciting.
So,
In order to get the same, sorry, Jen, in
no,
order,
go ahead.
yeah, in
Say
order
that.
to get the same buying power
There you go.
for the 48 million, we would have to have 64 now,
Right.
just because of inflation and changes. So these fixed sum levies every year get a little more impactful.
But the downside of switching to a fixed rate levy would bring us back up the
The
floor. So it would be like a net revenue, because you'd have to make up the floor revenue. It's very complex. So,
We're damned if we do and damned if we don't.
okay, so
That is kind of the summary.
So what I'm hearing, and tell me if if I'm hearing what I want to hear. We'll try for $1 million set aside for cash reserve while we're doing the balancing budget. And then we'll at least put $500,000. If we can't get to $1 million, we'll go to $500,000 for fiscal year 26.
That would be where I would support. I think we ultimately would need to bring something to the full board
Mhm.
for discussion on that, but
Okay.
I'm hearing at least in that line from Jim as well, so.
I would support what you just said, Jim.
Could you repeat it so I can know?
Yeah, so
Whatever.
suggested motion language, right? A motion
You
to
did.
set aside.
Probably needs to come from a board member, but.
I know, so I'm suggesting
That's
implanting it in your mind.
right.
So a range of $500,000 to $1 million in cash reserve set aside for the fiscal year 27-6 budget
To increase the cash.
to start building the cash reserves while we work on a new policy.
To set aside $500,000 or $1 million,
The range, yeah.
a range.
At the minimum of $500,000. We're gonna try for $1 million
26.
for 26.
I think that's good. And what about your comment about the policy? You want the policy to say
I
that we're
think,
not, or does that take care of not putting it in the policy?
I think that would take care of that, and I think the way that the policy that they suggested would start with is, to your point, going forward, the 5-year plan would be that the first official year of that 5-year full increase would not be till the 27
Great.
fiscal year budget. That also might give us a little bit of an opportunity, again, if we need to modify it or whatever, to based on what's happening throughout our state and this lovely country we live in these days, that we could then be able to have time to adjust the policy to reflect those changes. So I think that's language we can probably work with, we have general counsel work with to give language over for that to
Well,
make
why
it
don't we
work
just
in
adopt
treasurer's
that
office.
motion? Just adopt that motion.
Well, I mean, to send it when we send it to policy, I guess.
Oh, send it to policy. Oh, yeah, but we have to move.
Yeah,
I so moved.
all in favor?
Aye.
Yay.
Yeah,
Okay,
all righty. So that's one policy down.
What was the second one?
I got,
The second
Student
policy is
fees,
the age student fees.
Yeah, you want to talk about that, Mike?
sure. Slide 48, Rob. All right, this is all the backup for that. So just wanted to give the committee an update. We had talked about age student fees for a bit. The board had made some decisions in the last treasurer's report to get rid of some age student fees that we deemed uncollectible. What that left us with was we imported last week about $4.1 million, a little over $4.1 million in student fees from our old system into our new system. So those are anything assessed before the current school year.
For active students.
For active students only. And so they're out there. Parents can get on and pay. Everyone can look at those. We are doing a research into how we can maybe centralize student fees. So that's kind of an internal thing that we're kicking around as part of the whole centralization, decentralization conversation. I don't know, do you guys have any questions about that? There's not really a policy for it.
Were we able to isolate the 12th graders?
No,
I'm
we
concerned
will.
about those who are getting ready to graduate and what their balances are, so you can have, we can plan for how we're gonna handle that.
Yeah.
The little additional backup to this conversation is that the other part that was discussed when we first talked about it was the fact that, to where the treasurer was going, when students at the 12th grade go back to pay these fees are kind of received at the high school level towards they're the ones collecting it, though those fees may have been accumulated over years at other schools. And how do those fees go back and forth to those schools where they would have originally been charged to? So there's a little bit of that from those grade level fees and other things, but if you're.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We did clarify with the schools the process for waiving fees. A lot of times, depending on situations, those fees get waived as well. So that's out there. If you can go to the next slide, Rob, you can just kind of see what we brought in by type. Most of it, as you said, Mr. Craig, was the grade level fees that are out there. There's also some tuition, some intercession, et cetera.
So the
You need to look through-
tuition, if parents aren't paying their tuition, we're supposed to withdraw those families. I don't actually know who polices that, so we'd have to look into that.
Apparently no one.
Yeah,
79,000, so it's not huge, but
I think one of our conversations in the centralization thing is who really works the AR part, right? Like Like, and my wife, this is her whole career is accounts receivable. And so we have lots of conversations at home about working AR and making sure that things are collected.
Remind me, how much was written off?
It's about 11 million off the top of my head. I think it's right around 11.
11 million was written off.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they dated back to prior years to prior to COVID. So they've been
Long.
hanging around for a long time.
They went back
And-
to 2002 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is the current balance, do you think, a typical balance that we would have carry in the future, or can we shrink that, or?
Yeah, we could
Yes,
shrink
I
it.
think it will shrink.
So we've stopped charging the student fees, the grade level fees, at the request of the board. And so, you know, if we've made a decision not to charge it, are we gonna spend money trying to collect what's out there? So you can reduce it that way by waiving those. But the other fees are for lost textbooks and, you know, activity types things. There's some intercession fees. I'm concerned about the tuition though, because that means we're educating students we're not getting any funding for. And so we need to get on that.
The only other area that principals raised a concern about is the AP testing fees. Would that be something then the district is going to be picking up?
I don't think that the school-based fees was under consideration for eliminating. It was just what the district level charges is what was waived.
As an old AP teacher, I would hope that in many ways we pay AP. I know college boards. I know that's a lot of money, but there are families in some of our schools that may not have any, but some that may have one, and they may be really, those are big fees to pay for a test. An AP test costs a lot of money. And there are families where their kid is taking 5 of those tests. And that's really a lot of money.
Mhm.
And I just think that it is part of the responsibility we have. I don't know if it's based on need or based on number of whatever, but one way I'd approach the AP thing is that I would, much as we do or used to do, I don't know if we still do, for ACT and SAT, like on a particular grade level, we pay for it, or we used to, or.
We pay for the ACT every year, but not the AP courses at this
Right.
time. Mhm.
So the only thought I would have to us doing that, so one is I think that's something the board should make it as a policy or announcement or resolution. But I do think we would want to have a number that looks like before, so we can be able to say what that dollar that we're going to dedicate to that means, and then what else are we going to take out to do so.
Right.
Because I do think the one concern that I have with like some of these fees, the tuition for me is one that I think it isn't amounting to being like $1 million in tuition fees, but the quite honest truth is that there does mean we're educating students in a manner in which we did not pledge to do. And that gives them a benefit while great, but that's also something that we've committed to them that they need to do something in order to be able to stay in our district and stay in our schools. But I'm cautious about it only because I know we have students who sign up now based on what they're, you know, the resources they have, the things they can do, and would that necessarily change how many students would sign up for an AP or how many students would take it, and how much dedication and effort would be put into, do you just sign up to every AP because you can, right? And is there an expectation on your performance in the AP class that's attached to that fee? I mean, I think that's one of those things that maybe we should have that part of that discussion as well. Because what I would hate to see is a bunch of students sign up for AP classes and we have a bunch of 1s and 2s on AP exams, which brings down, you know, the
Return on investment.
yeah. So I'm all for making things more accessible to folks to be able to have that access, but I also want them to have a little bit of a buy-in or commitment. And this is similar to what we do with CCP courses, which is you actually have to perform in the course. And if you fail to do so, that dollar can come back to you.
I'm glad you mentioned the college whatever it's College Credit Plus or whatever it's
Mhm.
called, we pay a lot of money.
Mhm.
And I don't know why we have to be paying a lot of money for College Credit Plus, and then we're not necessarily interested in doing that for AP. Because the College Credit Plus is very expensive for us, for each student. So I think that's the precedent that I would look at, that I hadn't even thought about, thank you, to try to make the argument about AP.
Again, we just need to attach then the same standards that we do for College Credit Plus, which is your performance dictates whether or not you pay for the fee.
Might actually help.
And again, I think that is a commitment though, that it's a little bit different with AP classes or an AP test, because it's a one test. Tells you whether or not you pass or fail than TCP, but I think that's something the board can we can make an assignment to policy at the meeting on Monday to look into creating a policy that would work towards that.
I'm trying to think of the operational impact of performance-based fees. Because once you've taken the test, there's no incentive to actually pay for it if you didn't do well. And
Yeah.
so we'll spend more money chasing that money down. We could reimburse the district, but then you have the same issue of the parents being able to afford that many tests. So
Jim.
we'll look at it.
I like the idea that you brought up, Brendan, having the student have a little skin in the game, essentially. Maybe instead of a performance-based for AP, maybe it's a discount, maybe it's a 50-50. That way the student's paying some and the district is paying some. Maybe there's another way to do that that's administratively easier, maybe.
Okay, we can pull the data together and then work with the superintendent on a recommendation.
Yep.
Language.
And again, we can give an assignment to the policy committee at the meeting on Monday to begin the process of looking into a review of that. I think the other question are things like the athletics, field trips, some of these other ones that are going to be smaller amounts. And I think that was part of the other conversation around what we would do as a policy for each student fees, is that at some point, trying to collect on the $200 for the field trip kind of loses its value in the collection process.
Right.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good segue.
so I think that may be another thing that we can look at in the future. And in addition to kind of looking at what we're going to talk about in this minute here, which is the uncollectible accounts. Because I think that gets into a question of if we're centralizing some of those processes, we may have a better idea. If it's a $5 fee versus $105 fee versus $1,000 fee.
So the difference between that and the next policy is the uncollectibles. These are on adults, prior employees who owe us money. I guess it could be applied to student fees as well moving forward. But we keep carrying these books for people who've declared bankruptcy. We have no hope of ever collecting this money. So we just wanted some language to give the treasurer an authority.
Yeah.
We suggested anything under $5,000, and anything over $5,000 would be put in the treasurer's report for approval by the board.
Any thoughts? Okay. Jim, any thoughts about the people's?
I think that's fine policy, as long as there's some documentation that we've proven that the person that owes money is bankrupt.
Yes, we have that documentation.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so sure, I think it's a good policy.
So you're okay with moving it to policy committee? Awesome, thank you.
Good. I go back though, to one last thing about the AP,
Mhm.
rather than it being dependent upon whether or not you get a 1 or a 5 or whatever. I think the AP courses, it's whether you're attending, whether you're doing the work, there's ways to evaluate prior to that test, indeed, if we're gonna pay for that kid's test. And you'll know that pretty soon. But I do think we have to emphasize more and more with the community that we're paying as much attention to the kids that are doing and excelling in that way as we do to, as rightfully so, with the kids that need as much help as possible. So I just think that it's something to think about. I'm glad y'all thought
Yeah,
about.
and again, this is something we can give them the policy to kind of look at what are the policy implications, what are the potential needs within the schools themselves. We have certain schools, when we looked at the AP numbers of what's being offered and taken at schools, we had some schools that have very few, we had some schools that have a lot. And you also need the courses to go with some of those AP exams. So it is definitely a conversation for you to have in there.
Lauren just suggested that maybe the grade of the class dictates the percent of the share of the test. So,
Yeah, it can be a great way to do it as well.
so we
God,
can
we
look
have
into
an
that.
internal auditor.
But whatever policy we actually come up with, I think
Mhm.
the important thing is for us to, yes, this is a value to have to ensure that students are able to take these courses, but we also want to make sure that we are also paying attention to that that's a dollar that comes out of something else. Because we just keep saying we have very little dollars because the state don't want to give us more and a lot of other reasons. But this is a good way to show that we're caring about the folks who we're educating and trying to work better with them. Sounds good. All right. Made it through policies. Now we go back to the top of the slide deck, Rob.
Goodness me, Rob.
And while he's doing that, we'll key up, I think Kevin's starting us off.
So this is just our monthly financial update. So as we always include this kind of summary sheet, but we'll kind of go over that as we go through the slides. So the first slide that he's going to pull up there is general ledger, all funds, cash and investment balance. So always pointing out this is not just general fund. We have, and we'll go through that in a minute, but we have funds that are set aside for debt service. There's a little bit of funds for food service, some grant funds, etc. But the key difference you'll see on this slide is the blue is our more liquid account, our general checking account. And then the orange slice is Star Ohio. So you'll notice that it's rather small this month. But when we get to the end of February, we're actually going to grow that one back up. Really, December and January are kind of our low cash points in the year. We're waiting on this property tax advances, which we just received in February. Once the tax bill date passed, the due date. The other kind of key thing here is the yellow slice is what's set aside in our sinking funds for debt payment. We do have one of the sinking funds related to the 2010 issue that will come up in June, and all that money that's accumulated, it's almost a $22 million payment that will be made, and that will come right out of these funds that have been restricted for that. The gray is our longer term investments where we try to get a better return on those through our advisors at Red Tree. Next slide. This is, Rob, you're not advancing on my computer. I got to do that myself. Or flip the page, one or the other. I was like, Rob. No. I know. I can't. I appreciate that. I can't see that one very well, so I have to do it on here. So the next one is 3-year history of our liquid bank balances. Again, this is kind of varies depending on our strategy of how much we keep in Star Ohio versus in our liquid accounts. We did move a little bit over there in January, you can tell. So next slide. Again, let me do that. So this one shows cash balances by fund group. So at the end of January, we had 57 million in general fund, 64 million total in debt service. So that includes the sinking funds as well as other funds that are set aside, because we do have just generally, we have about $17 million that will be due in June. And so that some of that has already been set aside and will come out of there. Internal service, which is things related to remittances and other things. It's kind of a holding fund that we process those through. So at that point, there was 21 million in there. And then you see the others. We do state and federal grants were slightly positive at the end of the month.
So before you move on, I know several of you received a copy of a picture of cash that was in the CAFR or the ACFR. I can't get my tongue to do that. Just as a point of instruction, is that's not available cash just to spend. That's all the cash, including what's been set aside for the debt, right? So I just don't want anybody to think that we're misleading them, but just saying, you know, there's $50 million in the cash account. There's 177 million in the report, but 79 of that is set aside for debt. So, or it's in the what he called the Rotary Fund, where we've withheld taxes from employees. We can't spend that money. We got to pay it to the state and federal government. So I just wanted to clear that up, and we can show you in more detail, but just take this opportunity to teach.
Yeah, honestly, this graph kind of showing you that general fund has 57 million. I mean, that is what is available for normal operations. And again, a lot of that is encumbered or set aside for upcoming payroll and those type of things. But yeah, that was a good point of clarification. Next slide. So these specifically relate to general fund. Looking at cash balance and encumbrances. On the right, our cash balance was 57.5. There's a pretty significant difference to last month or last year at this time, and it's because of that $75 million in tax anticipation notes that we had issued in December, repaid in March. All of that kind of relates to the timing of when we were getting tax advances. You know, like in FY23, we had received our tax advances a little bit earlier. So there's some timing issues that kind of pop up on this one. Next slide. Again, general fund, 3 years of cash history. You can see at the end of January, it's 57.5, which relates back to the other slide. And you can see how that is obviously lower than the last 3 fiscal years. Next slide is the 3-year revenues by source. The total revenues, the third column there, 352 million. With our budget in the far column of 628. So I feel like we're pretty well on target with our revenues as it relates to the fiscal year. Again, we'll get a big bump this month with property taxes, and then it'll just be those regular foundation payments that we get twice a month. We get E-rate, we get TIF dollars, CRA dollars, all of those things will still come in. You can see that the green slices that take the second column and the third column, it was 97 million last year and 92 million this year. So at this point, about $5 million reduction in what we're receiving from the state. The property tax at that point, we are up as it relates to that. Just caution in the future. With the reappraisal, that will have a lagging effect that will drive down our state funding. So while we'll see the tax revenue go up, we'll continue to see the state funding go down in relation to that.
But the state funding goes down faster than the property taxes go up. Yes.
Next slide is a 3-year history of revenue by month. So it's just kind of showing each month where our revenue comes in. This graph pretty much stays consistent from month to month. Next slide is 3 years of expenditures with the budget at the end. We did increase the budget by 500,000 and in some early steps for the growth plan, getting a couple contracts in place, I think, for that. So that is reflected in the working budget column. You can see our salaries, blue columns, 286 this year versus 253 last year. And everything else is fairly consistent between those 2 years. Next slide. This shows our expenditures by month, and the biggest fluctuation here is if we have a 3-pay month versus a 2-pay month, and those fluctuate from year to year. You will see the repayment of the tax anticipation note obviously created that large cone in March there. The next slide is unencumbered, uncommitted expenditures. So what we're looking at the end of January, when you take out what we've actually spent of the budget. So the working budget, 664, includes the carryover encumbrances. We spent 369 actually out the door. 49 million is currently encumbered. About 195 million of the budget is assigned to salaries and benefits remaining for the rest of the year. We'll be doing a debt transfer this month, so that will take out most of the dark green piece of the pie. And then that leaves about 36 million, as I mentioned, is things that have not been encumbered as of this point, but some of those things will pay out even though they don't have to go through that process. So next slide is Mike.
Oh, yes, the statement of cash flow for the month. You can see there, we're starting to get some property tax advances in. We got some more since the month's closed, so thank you to the county auditor and county treasurer's office for assessing and collecting property taxes. Other things for the month that were kind of interesting, restricted state grants and aid was higher than previous months. I think there was a bit of a catch up, as we've gotten some of our data updated in the system. And then on the expense side, you'll see salaries and benefits are both higher just because, as Kevin mentioned, it was a 3-pay month. So, a little bit of a blip there.
And then the next slide is something we were trying to do quarterly. So this is kind of our quarterly October through December object level report within the general fund. Combines all of our cost centers, and so but it does give you a little more detail in that area. If you click on you don't have to do this, Rob, but if you click on the full report, it shows the full breakdown.
Is it just October through December or July through December year to date? But it's just the second quarter
That's a
report.
good question. It actually is year to date.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it is year to date.
I was like, I hope we
Through
didn't spend
second quarter.
131,000, 101 million in for 3
Yeah.
months.
I think I ran
Be a
the
little
report, the way I ran the report, it reflected as a quarterly report, but it is year to date
Thank you.
Through December.
through December. Yeah, July to December.
We'll get back on the quarters here.
It probably should have a column that shows the quarterly spend, but we'll work on that for next time. Next slide is this yours, Michael?
It is. So just go ahead, Jen.
Let me just introduce it. So these are values that we use to help balance when we're developing a budget. So we know every year that we budget on average salary for the schools, but because of vacancies, we don't always spend that budget. And so what we try to do is balance it to say, well, how much are we really going to spend? But, we carry this average vacancy rate through teachers and paras, and even in central office, we'll have positions that we budget for, people quit, and then it takes us a while to fill it. So then we have a savings for that time period. So this year we calculated it to be about 11.3 million, and related benefits, another 4. Department of Student Services has this tuition that they have to budget for, but they don't always spend it. And so based on history, we knew that they probably didn't need about 3 million of that for tuition. And then they have this unique thing where in the IEP, if it requires a one-on-one para, if that para is either vacant or absent, they have to hire a contractor immediately. And so we realized they were kind of budgeting both sides of it. So we put a negative contingency in there to kind of offset that. They're not going to spend both sides. They're either one or the other. We just don't know where. So we put a negative in to kind of offset that. Tuition and required encumbrances. So other than special ed tuition, there we have district-wide tuition that we have to pay for. And so that kind of ebbs and flows. And so we put in some money for there. Then the ECE grant. So we pay the early childhood teachers, and then at the end of the year, we journal entry money into a grant. We have to spend the money in the general fund first. And so that's that offset. And then the CFT office has their own budget. We pay them on our payroll, and then they reimburse us. So that's a net effect. So that was an offset to the budget. And then we had positive contingency. Well, we used to set aside $2 million in the budget just to sit there for things that popped up that we didn't know about, right? And so we tried to do that, but it just got offset by all these negatives. So we're just trying to be very transparent when we are talking about our budget. We have to make sure that we cover these negatives in order to stay balanced. Do you want to add anything to that?
I think you.
I stole your show.
No,
Sorry.
you're.
Okay, I'll hand it back to you on principal.
Right.
Yep.
All right.
Jenna, I have a question. So
Yeah.
on salaries, that's about a 3% vacancy rate on average during the year. Is that about right?
I don't remember the calculation. I remember prior to COVID, it was more like 6 to 7 million a year. And then during the years of COVID, it was 18 million a year.
Oh,
And so now we're starting to settle back a little bit.
thank you.
So the first preschool slide, it kind of gives a breakdown of the funding sources that are used to fund the seats for preschool.
Just for CPS.
Just for the CPS portion, yes. These are students educated by CPS preschool. The yellow column is January, and I went ahead and included the last 2 months. We've talked about, I think January, February is kind of the peak of when we have the most kids in seats at preschool, but you can see it was about 1,976 at that point. Each of the funding sources that mention expansion, those are the seats that are receive some sort of assistance through the preschool levy portion.
So the way Vera does it is like that first line, it says the ECE plus expansion. So the morning session will be covered by the ECE grant, which is a title grant. And then the expansion dollars are last dollar in, and they'll cover the afternoon. So that's how they pair them, the different pairings.
All right, and then the next slide is the breakdown of the showing the calculation for tuition assistance. So again, this is funds from the expansion dollars that are used in some manner for those students. So in this month, 761 students received some level of assistance, either full-time or half-time. And then depending on the number of days they were in session. The year-to-date's 3.4 million compared to 3.1 last fiscal year. The other thing, the caveat we noted before is the ECE grant did provide a pilot that is funding some additional seats. And so that's one reason you see the drop in the number of kids, because those kids are actually receiving full grant funding for their day. And so that reduced, as Jen mentioned, last dollar in. Next slide is kind of showing the revenue and expenses for the preschool expansion. The middle column there is actual 8.9 million has been received and 9.3 has been spent. I think in February we have an additional United Way payment. So those expenses will be obviously higher next month. The next slide, again, showing the number of students that receive some level of tuition assistance, CPS students again, and again, the explanation for why that is lower this year. And that concludes preschool.
So before we move on to state and federal grants, I wanted to do a little circle back for some of the preschool numbers.
Yeah.
Because I think we've had this conversation around like the number of students total who are using preschool, but the dollar amount of tuition assistance that we've done for this year, at least by the chart, is more than the dollar amount for previous year with more students. And so I don't know if we want to say something to why that might be, or who are those students that we are now.
The master agreement allows for a 3% increase in the dollar value per student. I think we're still hold to 3%, but CPP went to 10% increase last year. So now the master agreement next year, we're going to a per pupil basis. So that'll look significantly different, I think.
And again, it's just something to note that like, even though we may have a different number as the tuition assistance number, you know, in some cases we are providing more assistance for a student or at a higher cost to ensure some of these students are getting quality preschool, which are things that we were trying to work through in our discussions around the master agreement last year. Other questions before we move on to?
I don't have a question. I think this has been a very successful program. And I think the first giant decision that this board is going to have to make is about the preschool renewal, even more so necessarily than about the budget. And I know that there's a lot of different opinions on the board about preschool. And I just think that it wouldn't be a bad idea for finance to spend even some more time talking and thinking about it as we move on, so that indeed finance could try to come with some sort of recommendation I know we don't usually do that, but I just think this is gonna be a lot of community pressure about this, as well as we have to be going to the folks to vote on this, and we need to be clear. And another question is, I know we spend a significant amount of money for special services for kids that are within CPS, and I think also outside of CPS, we provide the special services, and I think that's something to emphasize. And I continue to be disheartened about the last dollar in from the preschool promise providers. And maybe you can help me understand that, or maybe correct some impression I have.
So it was my understanding at the beginning of time with CPP, the agreement was last
It
dollar
was
in,
long ago.
because they didn't want us to use up all the general fund levy money when we had all these other grants available to us. So the agreement was last dollar in. On their side, they were supposed to fundraise for other funding sources, and because I think their turnover, they just weren't able to do that, make it happen. So I think, and it's been a while since I looked at it, I think we are their only source of revenue. Or that 90% of it
Yeah,
at least.
largely true.
Yeah.
So for next year, when it's based on enrollment, do our dollars go up and theirs go down? The preschool promise go down? We have about 2,000 students and they have,
Well, but they have to be qualifying students, right? So right now we're supporting 761 students. And so depending on when that pilot ends, I'm not really sure. Shauna, do you know? That's okay. So assuming that pilot continues next year, 761 students would benefit from, we would add their total number of kids divided, and come up with it per pupil. So we've each agreed that a administrative cost would come off the top, which would include our special ed services, because our special ed team that was added as a result of this expansion is supporting both the expansion students for both organizations. So then we'll come up jointly with a per pupil cost value. Start off with the $15 million, take off the administrative set asides, divide out the rest of it by per pupil, and that's our per pupil value. They spend it as they seem the appropriate, and we do the same. We use that money to support, to reimburse us for salaries on teachers.
sure. So we have about 2,000 students and they have about, do we know how many students they have?
920-ish, I think.
We have 700 though, 760 that are qualified.
Qualified, I see.
Right.
So the breakout will remain relatively the same, projecting.
Right now, they're getting bigger share of the money, so
Right.
their share will probably go down.
One of the things we talked about when we did the conversation around the master agreement was in part, portion of their funds was supposed to be dedicated towards student tuition. Another portion of it really was supposed to be trying to get programs that were close to being quality programs up to being quality programs, folks that were quality programs to be higher quality programs, that kind of deal. We had a lot more of an expectation in the way the master agreement was originally written to like how that divide happens. And I think what we moved towards was giving a little bit more freedom in that sense, but then that meant also you didn't have the same dollar at the end of the day.
The original agreement was very strict about the students who economically needed the help the most. And that language was removed from the agreement, much to my disagreement.
Thank you.
It isn't the same that the voters voted for originally.
The language in the master agreement, you're saying?
Mhm.
Yeah. Correct.
The second edition or the third edition. Yeah, the third edition of a master agreement is so much different than what the original vote was about. And particularly that it is the issue about the kids and the families that needed it the most. And indeed, we have, much as they've done now with vouchers and other things, they've taken some of that away as to categorizing or reaching out or marketing or whatever. And it's a great concern.
I will say though, and this is part of the conversation we had with Preschool Promise when they did their presentation in, I think it was either November or October. Again, large portion of what we're tapping into to provide that assistance in those communities are students who either potentially could become CPS students, which that's another thing that we tried to drive as part of this, is that we did not have the same touch into those spaces before that we can now, and that the expectation is, and this is where we probably have just not lived up to the agreement that we all said we would do, is that we would have more regular conversations about that transition of those students who then can become CPS students and more I want to say, and that may be something that we can always ask to Vera, is the access to be able to promote and communicate with those outside locations. But I think the other thing that we kind of committed though is that we all lived under the expectations that we'd work together, and as we go to the renewal, at the end of the day, the big thing was results, right? To get better quality preschool, more places, so all of our students would be benefiting, and not just CPS buildings, but also other buildings that would feed the students into our programs in our schools. And I think that's the one thing that as we look into what we're going to do for looking at the future grants and dollars amounts, we've now probably saturated as much as we can do as far as getting students in the doors that were not in the doors before. Now we have to look at what does that mean once they're in the door? What kind of quality of education they're getting in the door? How are they more kindergarten ready? Those type of measures that I don't know that we've ever really attached to the dollars, right? Like the number of kindergarten ready students, we know it for CPS students, but I don't know we've ever had that kind of information from CPP, which is something we did kind of negotiate into this agreement to be able to connect up. So I think there's an opportunity to still look at the goal for what many of the community voted on, which was we needed to expand access to a lot of students, a lot of kids in the community who did not have access to preschool.
And it was about only quality seats. We were supposed to be increasing quality seats, and we were not supposed to be providing, the taxpayers weren't supposed to be providing childcare.
Yeah.
It was all about, and frankly, we used the Denver model, and the Denver model said that the best thing you can do is that the outside providers use the curriculum of the major school district. And that never happened. So I think that transition is there's, I mean, again, all things considered, this has been a great thing. Thousands of children have had preschool that wouldn't have had it to begin with. But as we try to go to the voters, maybe there's some return on investment effort to be done on preschool. Because
Well, I think the starting point though would be to live up to the actual agreement that we signed just last year, which is our part also. So that means going and getting information. It means regular meetings with them. The things that we said we wanted to do, which is why we put it into the agreement. So I think before we, and again, I think this is all a part of why we have to get these dollars to keep going. It's before we start, we have a lot of conversations about ROI this year. We got more stuff coming from those folks, but at the end of the day, we made an agreement, we signed an agreement, and then all of us have to live up to it, at least for now, until we sign a new one.
from a jurisdiction, it did fall to finance committee to worry about the financial part of preschool. And the instructional part fell to student achievement. But when we, again, made some changes there, I think part of that fell to the wayside. To your point about what we need to be doing.
Yep. All right, we'll continue on there.
Member Craig, can I?
Oh,
just
yeah,
share one?
sorry.
I just wanted to share this conversation. It would be really easy for us to implement on our end because it just reminds me of conversations we have with the parochial schools. Our auxiliary services people meet with them on a regular basis to just make sure all of the alignment is good. And so we could very easily implement the same process for our friends at CPP.
So many acronyms in our district. Continue.
All right, next slide, Rob. Try to go without acronyms for a bit. So this is the year-to-date grant spending. So this is the dip from recognizing our carryover. So every year you can see if you look at the history, there's a bit of a dip. We're still on target, but this is a dip from having carryover. And we just kind of go back up through the end of the year. If you'll hit the next slide, Rob, and kind of see where we're at as far as meeting things. Superintendent Murphy mentioned the non-public schools, as just a reminder, we do a lot of support for them, both on academic side and the financial side. So we make sure to help them spend their money as well. All things are looking good there. We're starting in that two fiscal years at once thing. So we're working on budget planning for next year plus spending out this year. If you hit the next slide, Rob, just a reminder of where our grants go, and we don't really change this much. And a reminder of the non-public share, just to stay on theme here. So there's quite a non-public share of the money that we get. And if you go one more for me, sir, thank you. You can see the percentages spent here, with and without carryover. So again, overall, things are progressing. The one thing I did want to mention here, so kind of a kudos to the academic side of the house. Second to the bottom there is the Title I non-competitive school improvement grants. So those are given to the district based on kind of academic performance back in the 22-23 school year. And so each school gets a chunk of money to spend to improve performance. And over the last couple of years, we have graduated out quite a few schools. So coming into this year, 18 of the schools have graduated out. For this year alone, going into next year, another 11 will graduate out. So which is awesome. Credit to our schools for sure for improving performance. So that's the good news. The bad news is we don't get that money anymore. but it's, I think
That's a good thing.
it's a good problem to have, right? You know, this is a good problem to have. So wanted to shout that out to the superintendent and her team.
Any questions, thoughts, statements on federal state grants?
So on the agenda, the QI team report goes next. I don't know, is that a separate PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's
No, it's a different PowerPoint, Rob. Yeah.
Yeah.
So while Rob's doing that, just want to introduce Michelle Harris. Anyone doesn't know her. Michelle is our awesome payroll supervisor.
Superstar.
Yes. So every time you look at your bank account and see a direct deposit from Cincinnati Public Schools, thank Michelle. Thank Michelle and her team for making that happen for us. And Michelle is actually one of our two employees that are doing the Children's Hospital Impact U course this year.
Right.
So she's been working with those folks and taking the class, and she's here today to present on her extended time QI project.
All right, thank you, Mike. Oh, a little closer. Okay, sorry, I'm short too. There we go. All right, perfect. All right, so yes, like Michael said, I am leading the QI project to help reduce the frustrations that are going on with our extended pay process. And this, just to provide a little bit of background, if you want to go to the next slide. This process is basically where our educators or our employees are providing additional services for our students, like home instruction, tutoring, attending PD days to elevate their skills. And they are compensated for these type of roles. And unfortunately, some of the frustrations that they experience is having delays getting paid for those additional roles. And so what our job is as our QI team is to try to reduce those frustrations by making sure that we can get them paid in a timely manner, so that they are not so frustrated and are continuing to provide those services. Because unfortunately, as a result, some of those educators do not want to do the additional roles because they're not confident that they're going to get paid on time. Next slide, please. So the team that I am leading is comprised of multiple employees throughout the district and different departments that are currently involved in this process. We have employees from the treasurer's office as well as HR and talent, DSS, curriculum, some of the main people that participate in these additional processes. So we're currently meet on a weekly basis and discuss the challenges that we're facing and some interventions that we can implement so that we can try to fix all those issues that we're experiencing. Next slide, please. What we have here is our SFMEA. So this is us breaking down the process and identifying the failure modes that we are seeing with each step, and then brainstorming some interventions that we want to implement so that we can try to help fix those issues. So for example, like the requisition is created and submitted. Some of the problems that we see is some of the requisitions don't get created and approved until after the job is worked, which is already putting that teacher in the hole for delay of payment. So one of the things that we have discussed is providing additional training to the secretaries that have to create the requisitions so that they know that they have to do that up front so that those teachers can get paid as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Our key driver diagram. So our goal for this year is to try to increase the percent of timesheets that we receive and get those paid within 14 days from 71% to 75% by the end of May. And one of the biggest things that we've been focusing on right now is the timesheet submission. So currently our process is really manual. The secretaries take the timesheets, upload them, complete them, and then upload them into an email box. And then one of our payroll technicians has to go through and manually pull out the data in the system and then create a upload form so that we can get it processed through. And so that causes more delays because she has to do that manually. Room for error because again, she's typing in things, a lot of numbers in manually. So some things that we have done is we have created a testing smart sheet so that we can have the information get submitted to us more electronically so that she doesn't have to key in all that stuff. So it'll help reduce the amount of time that she has to spend. And she could just do more copy and paste and be able to analyze the information that she's receiving as opposed to having to rush and key all that information in. Next slide, please. So our run chart is a year's worth of data. So we are showing the percent of time cards that we are paying in less than 14 days. One of the things that we are wanting to narrow in on with the run chart data is how to identify where our interventions are actually helping us and what interventions are not helping us. Right now, the data kind of shows a little wonky just because we're just looking at the baseline as to everything that we're receiving. We're not really specifying what interventions are impacting certain timesheets so that we can see whether or not those things are working or not. So currently our learnings that we have experienced is, for me personally, how important it is for having cross-department collaboration. Because if you don't have everyone that you need at the table, there's not really a good way for you to create a better process. Using some of the tools that I'm learning at Children's Hospital has helped us a lot because it's identifying some of those root causes that have been creating those challenges that we're experiencing. And also consistency is key. If you're not meeting on a consistent basis, there's no way that you're going to be able to move forward and implement changes because things have the way to drop through the cracks. If you're not always on top of them, you're going to forget about them. But our biggest steps that we're focusing on, like I said, is creating a more electronic process to submit the extended hours, create an escalation process for some of the repeat offenders that we're seeing, and a tracking process to ensure that only the approved amount of hours are being submitted and being paid. And where we're looking at our assessment of where our team is, I'm putting this at a 4 just because we have some changes that we're testing, but we haven't seen any improvements. And that's why I want to focus on our run chart and the data so that we can get a better way so that we can see those changes and how that's helping us out.
Michelle, you showed a year's worth of data, but you just recently started this team. When did you begin?
The year's worth of data, we were pulling that to see where we were before we started the team. So we started the team officially in October.
Right. So you wouldn't see any changes prior to October, but they just use that to help identify what the root causes are and where the highs and lows are.
So we shouldn't be mad at them.
Not yet.
But I will tell you that I have not had one extended to pay complaint phone call this year.
Now, what's
Yeah.
the year though? What is it? We're talking January 1?
The whole school year, I have not had one
Alright.
phone call about extended time. So, and I typically get quite a few, so
Yeah, so-
anecdotally, I think the
Congratulations.
process is already being improved, so.
Giving a little background also to this, these presentations as a whole, and specifically this, part of the effort was to show how we are trying to improve systems and processes. Because we were recognizing there were things that were causing errors, there were things that were causing folks difficulties. And as much as we can get rid of it, it proved to be kind of two levels. One is that it's a cost saver, right? So we were correcting things and not making mistakes on things and getting stuff done quickly and that kind of deal. But the process part made it easier for us to ask others and to work on other things and to do other things at that time. Because I think that was one of the things we've been learning with some of these is that we are spending a lot of time fixing mistakes that happen as opposed to doing the actual work. And so these have been great presentations to kind of demonstrate some of that.
And the real intrinsic value amongst a lot of these projects is there are so many cross points between handoffs and between departments. For example, when somebody sees an error on their paycheck, they call payroll, but the error could have happened three departments away. And so the key to learning is that person 3 departments away, their work and how it has an impact on the whole process. And so every team that starts, there's not one person that understands the process from beginning to end. So it's a huge learning step at the very beginning to document what really is the process from beginning to end. And so it's more about process learning and just understanding how we all impact each other and depend on each other to be accurate.
I had a couple of questions. So this process that you went through is in collaboration with Children's Hospital?
The QI project is, yes.
And is that QI project, is that learning that we can keep and retain for future projects?
Mhm.
And
So that we've partnered with them for probably 10 years. And every year they let me have at least one seat in class. I've had 2 or 3 at one time. And I'm trying to talk to Dr. Khan about letting me have my own class so I can finish the whole department. But how many people we train now? We counted them recently.
Raise your hand.
Yeah.
And then probably
Probably another 5
more,
more.
yeah.
So it's becoming per se, because we have 9 quality improvement teams in the treasurer's office alone
yeah,
that are using these tools. Some have gone through the training and some haven't yet, but they're learning as they go. And so it's really the whole continuous improvement process has become part of our culture.
right, great.
But yes, Dr. Khan has been an incredible support. And he comes and visits with us at least once a year and all our teams get to present to him. And he uses that information with his funding partners. So he can continue offering the class to us.
Great. And I heard you mention the word cut and paste. Would there be an option in the future for download?
So our pie in the sky idea is we want it to actually go into the Business Plus system, which is our payroll system. And so we don't have to do any type of cutting and pasting. We want all that information to just go directly into the system.
When you do that, will you have the ability to put in some software parameters that would highlight what possible errors at the entry point?
So when we do the upload, it does show us if there's any errors with the data that's been uploaded.
Great. Okay, thank you.
And prior to every payroll cycle, they do 13 different audit reports looking for anomalies in the payroll before we send the file to the bank. So we try to catch them ahead of time.
Thank you, Michelle.
Other questions?
Good job, Michelle.
So as always, when new visitors come, we let them know that, once you presented, you're welcome to leave, but please feel free to stay and enjoy the rest of these festivities. Next up is
Go back to the big slide. Yeah, there you go. Cody.
our much anticipated, long awaited.
The hot topic of the day, ROI. Heard that term a couple times, but we're going to go back to acronyms, I guess. But yeah, ROI, return on investment. So here we're presenting a tentative, and I say tentative just because obviously if there's any topics that come up from the board directly or from finance committee, those can be added on here, substituted in. But we have a schedule developed from March through December of different topics that will be coming up. You can also see the request origin over there on the right. So many of these were from a Google form, which did include input from board members directly, and those were captured on here. Different budget managers across the district that have talked or that I've done ROI projects with just to get the full scope of what everybody would like to see. And these are the topics that were the highest priority topics. And July is left open. If we have a meeting in July, we can pick a topic from the additional list that is on the next slide. But yeah, that's the tentative schedule for what ROI is going to look like for this year. And next slide, Rob. And there's just some future topics. These were also captured on the Google form. I did not want to leave anybody's input off. So if there is room in our schedules or agendas, if a topic needs to be added, we can pick from this list or come up with new ones. Cool. Any question on the schedule before I move on to KPIs?
I have a question, but I had a conversation with another board member on return on investment, and I took a different position than they did, not surprisingly, but it was a question about return on investment by school.
Now, I'm wondering, is that the catch-all per pupil document that I might have heard from before in the past?
It might be. I think
Okay.
the per school thing and the
Mhm.
per student cost, those
Mhm.
sorts of things are, I think, of interest from an
Absolutely.
equity standpoint. You know, another word we're not allowed to use any longer that we will continue to use. But how do you know, and I think that's kind of dangerous
Mhm.
because schools are so different from one another. But so I don't know how the standard would be, but I think there is an interest in that. I mean, we like reported 18 schools are no longer on this other list and whatever. And I do think per student and per school, and even when we talk about transportation,
Mhm.
the actual cost
Mhm.
of each of these schools, and let alone the result. So I just, that might be surfacing. I'm not supportive of it, but I do think that there's a growing interest in
Absolutely.
that, particularly in the community, and the more, as many times as we're gonna be going to the public in the next 5 or so years,
Mhm.
that's something we're gonna have to be able to have an answer for and an elevator speech about.
So it would be intriguing analysis. And we did send out the cost per school at Mr. Crossett's request last night, so you got it here last night.
Without the self-contained, right?
Well, it's both, it's with and
With
without.
and with,
yeah.
okay.
So, but when you start adding the academic performance, you have to stop and think about the why, as to why you may not be seeing the results you want. There's so many factors that would drive into.
Mhm.
And so I'd be very cautious to analyze the data first before using it to determine any decision making. But because it could be that they're implementing a new program and it's the first year and you need time to get something going before you see the results. Or it could be a lot of different factors. And so it's fascinating. The data geek in me is like, oh, that's so cool. I want to work on that. But we were cautioned because if you look at third grade reading, for example, if reading scores goes up, was it because of the teacher, the quality of the teacher or the experience of the teacher? Was it the involvement of the parents that they're doing reading at home? Was it the curriculum? Was it the tutoring? Was it the paraprofessional in the classroom? There's so many factors that go into that one test result that you have to be really cautious about how you use that data.
I completely agree, and that's part of my problem with it. But again, we are using basically one assessment as we are measuring our schools, or as the community is hearing about our schools, and that's that darn state report card, which for me has almost no credibility because of the thing that you just mentioned, as well as bad attitude about all of our kids from Columbus anyway. So I think we're being assessed and we are being evaluated, and we're in a process of trying to market ourselves. So I think there has to be some way that we can not respond to that card, but that report card, but be able to have confidence about what each of our schools are achieving. And I do, but I don't know that the community's gonna have to be educated.
Yeah. So, in thinking of the profile of the school, so there's so many when we try to get to an equity budgeting formula, we looked at, the number of students with disabilities in a building, the number of ELL students in the building, the number of gifted, the number of homeless students in the building, discipline, attendance, size of the building, all those factors. And so maybe that's something that, I don't know, we can come up with. It would be a pretty large but fun project.
And in response to that, those things that you just mentioned are actually part of the state report card that drives us down by design. So we have to be able to talk to the community and reason with them, because those are the things that attendance counts against us. The kids that have learning disabilities, they can't get enough support for the testing or whatever that anybody else would be giving in a normal situation. So all those things that drive us down are the things that the report card emphasizes. And then, of course, let alone their analysis. So I just think that maybe we have to figure out how to present our schools. Like most people love their school, but they don't think CPS might be developing this or delivering or whatever because of that report card. So it would be intriguing to try to figure that out.
Just want to note though, one of the things that Cody's done a great job of over the last year in doing these presentations is the breakdown per school on some of these things. And what it has spurred in conversation is, for instance, if we look at how we are spending on particularly like facilities products, right? Or we look at groundskeeping or something like that, where maybe one school has a ton of it and has a big need for it, another school doesn't. But as a district, we're buying these products. So maybe it actually makes more sense to centralize certain processes. Those are things we've had conversations around these topics. Again, another one that comes to my mind was when we did counselors. And what we were noting was, okay, so there's a standard, and how many counselors do we have per school? Do some schools, are we almost on the verge of being at that second one? Do we have social workers or stuff like that we were looking at? I think at one point we also did AP, the assistant principals, or we were doing some of these other factors that we're looking at on when they were at targeted schools that we were saying these need to be done in that same sense. I think one of the struggles we're going to have in doing those kind of conversations over the universal, to your point, is that our schools are very different and our schools have very different buildings. They're not all the same shape. They're not all the same look to them. They don't have the same floor plan and format. And that creates differences in needs. I think, again, President Moffitt's been big on trying to create some type of per school or per building documentation. I think it's important for us at some point from a fiscal stance, be able to see, and this is maybe the great part of ROI, is, okay, so we spent that extra $1 in this building to do X, Y, and Z. Did that make sense for what that dollar was being used for? Right. And I think that's the harder conversation that doesn't fit on a nice one-sheeter at times, which is the great work that Cody's been doing. So I want to make sure he gets time to tell us a little bit more about what's going on. But that is the hard part that we've been trying to have that conversation for the last year is, yeah, we know this is valuable. We know this might be really good. But for that next dollar we're going to spend on it, are we going to see a measurable result? And if we don't, is there a better way to spend that next dollar somewhere else to make sure that our student results, which are ultimately what we should be measured by, is how our students improve, our students grow, what our students go on to do. Each of the buildings, they're better set up. So I think that's one of the wonderful parts we've had on some of these ROI conversations, because it did trigger thoughts in our head of like at times where you're going, okay, well, this makes total sense, right? To have this person there and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's 700 kids to one. This other building got 200 kids to one. Huh. Maybe one ain't the number for this. It's the same way. But you've given us a schedule of stuff, and I think that's awesome to get back on track with some of the different. Or I also will give Cody a lot of credit, because there have been times where he's had to pull people along with him to get him to these meetings to be able to present. And so it is both a hard work to do the work and a hard work to get it here. But do you want to tap into the KPI?
Yeah. And before I move on to KPIs, there's just two other things I want to mention that the ROI process has really done for me personally and how it's helped me grow. And what I think is spreading throughout the district is that topic and idea of ROI. You hear the term ROI in more conversations, and people in my mind are thinking, hey, if I spend that, what am I really going to get out of it? And so there's the intentionality with the dollars that we've talked about. So spreading the awareness and the education that Jen alludes to a lot. And also increasing that collaboration across from the financial side of the house to the educational side of the house. Because sometimes we look at dollars and may not always know what the results are at times. So really creating those relationships has helped me and grow. And I think it's just really important of the foundation we're creating. So thank you. We can go on to KPIs, Mr. Rob. Alrighty, so this time around, we're doing the mid-year evaluation on contracts under $200,000. If you recall, in the earlier months or the later months of last year, we did over $200,000 contracts. So going to the under 200,000, if you want to go to the next slide, please. This slide represents a graph of how the results were being self-reported. So the process that I had was I reached out to all the budget managers, principals, anybody that owned a contract, that individual contract that was less than $200,000, and had them self-report on where they thought their KPI was at this time of the year. Whether that KPI has already been met, that contract is ended and they met that KPI. If that contract was on track to meet the KPI and there's still more data to come, or if they didn't meet it. And even I wanted to include missing KPIs because there is always an opportunity to get better and to grow. And so I think that piece is important to note. I also want to highlight this does not include non-public contracts. I kept those out. I do not require a KPI for non-public because we cannot measure that performance. But about a $25 million value across all these contracts. And the big important part I thought was pretty neat here. We used a total of 464 different vendors for these contracts, 69% of which identified as either local, minority, or women-owned, or a combination of the three. So just a vast use of our vendors. And then there is a link there. You have a printout copy of the contracts themselves if you'd like to print out, but there is a link there for the same printout. Next slide, Rob. So to kind of highlight what we've been talking about, this QI. So I just want to talk a little bit about the learnings of what's going on and just the increased collaboration that's happening. So quantitative versus qualitative. So using that mindset when looking at some of these contracts, it's not always about how we feel about things, but looking at things on a quantity. How can we measure what our performance is? But also teaching me how to feel about those contracts. And it's a reciprocal thing. And opportunities for improvement. So as I was getting to meet with these different budget managers, the different principals, the education and awareness piece, so making sure that new staff is hit. They suggested things such as quarterly KPI updates that would help the principals a lot, including their semi-annual trainings, training their senior account techs and their staff on this stuff, and just offering refreshers. So just more opportunity to grow there. And like I said earlier about the ROI, this is also just increasing collaboration. So for me, understanding what individual contracts are, not just looking at things from a dollar amount or what the system says the description is, but understanding why we have that service, what that service is doing. So that way we can really truly measure the impact that it's having on our district. And then next slide. Yep. So what I wanted to do with the under $200,000 contracts, not including non-public, so the contracts we're talking about currently, is just provide a list of vendors with multiple contracts across the district. There's a full list, but I pulled out the top 10 here just to kind of highlight vendors that we use prominently and the amount of dollars that we're having in those contracts. So you can see the pie chart there that kind of breaks down our top 10 vendors with the highest dollar amounts, not necessarily the most contracts, but the highest dollar amounts. Next slide, Mr. Rupp. And so on the previous slide, you'll notice that the biggest piece of the pie was Hamilton County, or HCESC. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what was that breakdown looks like, just from a under $200,000 contract, mind you, and not including any of their non-public contracts. Just breaking that out, seeing that they had quite a few, there's a high dollar amount, just seeing where those contracts were throughout the district and just showing the different site locations and how many are at each location. I did look into anything that kind of stood out. if you talk, like, for example, looking at Dater or some of the other schools that have two contracts with Hamilton County. One is a data coach contract, and the other is some kind of PD service for whether it's EL training. There was some scaffolding training going on, but just to kind of look at, make sure there was no duplicative services going on, but that they were actually using those contracts for other things. Next slide, Mr. Rob. So these next three slides, I shifted the scope of what we were looking at a little bit because curiosity always gets me. So I wanted to dive into Hamilton County as a whole. So these next three slides represent all of the contracts as of January 31st that we had with Hamilton County across the district, without regard to dollar amount and without regard to whether it was public or non-public. The first slide here represents anything that was at a central office budget unit. So it just shows any of our central office folks that had contracts with Hamilton County. You can see we have quite a few with non-public, and just highlighting where those were and those locations of those. And then there is a link there at the bottom that has all the contract detail for each of these. So if anybody wanted to dive in and look at what each contract was for, it's all in the detail.
One of the reasons why we're looking for multi-contracts with the same vendors to make sure that we're in compliance with our procurement policies. And mostly it's natural growth. So one school will get a contract and they'll talk to another school and they'll say, oh, I want that contract. I want that contract. And then pretty soon we're over the limit for an RFP. And so we're trying to put tracking mechanisms in place to make sure that we're following our own policies before we get an audit finding.
To that point, the number of contracts that we have, I mean, when you have them all listed, whether they're above 200,000 or below 200,000 or whatever, I was stunned. I didn't see a complete list, but I was stunned at how few contracts we have that are over $1 million out of a percentage. It seems like as big as we are, which is that duplicity of contracts, perhaps, all these small contracts, that just, that can't be helpful or efficient. I mean, there's just, it's, again, I can't remember the exact number, but I ended up out of like how many sheets, but there was maybe a side and a half of, 20, each side, that actually were over $1 million, and everything else for 20 more pages was very much less than $1 million.
Right. So you're right, because those
can't be
little
good.
bitty ones get touched the same amount of times.
It's ridiculous.
And it's a lot of internal work. So we need to think about, so we use this information to feed to purchasing so that they can maybe negotiate group
Well, we've
contracts.
talked about that for a
Mhm.
couple of years, and it's been part of the outsourcing, insourcing, but also the getting a hold on, getting a grip, if you will, on these things and all these other contracts from the schools and from even central office. I'm fascinated by that, and I thought that this doesn't even seem efficient.
Cody, do you remember how many vendors have multiple contracts? Is it in here somewhere?
It's on the, let me see here. I can pull it up. It's on slide 34 with a link. Let me access my link. Is that link working for you, Rob? Because it's not working for me. And I'm the one that put the link there.
Yeah. There is.
There it goes. One. Cool. 108.
108 vendors have more than one contract.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. A good majority of those have two, though.
Yes, there's a big chunk of those that only have two, maybe three.
So we can dig in and look for the low hanging fruit and go from there.
Absolutely.
This is sort of
There's
big.
only
Okay.
one or two that has over 10. One of those being a multi-vendor order, which is stuff like PNC and stuff like that.
I do think one of the things we had a conversation around when we did the contract, when they previously did a big contract review, was trying to improve. Schools are contracting out for the exact same thing
Yes.
And there's multiple different vendors who do it. And that is definitely something we, as a board, probably also do need to give a little bit of direction on. Because we have made that process be left to some level at the school level to make some of those decisions. And whereas I mean, I know one example that at least comes to my mind is about some of the maintenance equipment and things we're using for those things where we said it just only makes sense to order all of these things at one time and then be able to divide them out and as schools needed for certain resources and certain materials. In part because we were switching to being more green and how we were keeping some of those materials. So you had to get a vendor. There's only so many vendors that you can do. And then once you've now got the 2 vendors who can do all of it for the district, you're now at where you have to do where you have to put out for bid. And so an RFP for it. So I do think it's something that's been a long conversation that I think it would be helpful for the board to at least give a little direction as to the expectations that we go forward with that. Because I think to Board Member Bolton's point, if you're touching 20 different vendors to provide pencils at a school, because we got 20 different people doing it throughout the district, while each one of those contracts is below the $200,000 threshold or below where it needs to be.
And then the
Still a lot.
challenge becomes, once you do a bid and somebody wins a bid, you have to direct all the work towards that bid. Because it's not fair if you let the losing vendors continue to sell to our district,
Yeah.
right? And so, we've had that criticism too.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
That chart that you had up, it would be interesting to add a column or two to that chart of the type of service that they provide. That might be a good starting point.
Great idea.
And maybe even the school column for the number of schools or something.
Absolutely. Rob, if you want to go to 37. Sorry, I got a couple. Yep. So that was just finishing off where the Hamilton County are throughout the schools. And to Mr. Crossett's point, that would be a great idea to add for the types of service, just so we can keep overlapping. So I will do that as well. And then the last slide, Mr. Rob. So I know we had a lot of talk about a lot of contracts with Hamilton County, but I also wanted to point out their funding source just to spread awareness. Each piece of the pie represents the different fund that you can see, but on the right, there's a summary that says general fund is only 6%. Fund 19, which is principals fund or something like that, is less than 1%. Our auxiliary funds or our funds for our non-public schools are 6% and federal funds are 88%. So yes, there is a lot of Hamilton County contracts out there, but high majority, 88% are funded by federal funds.
In last year's budget reduction conversations, I heard on several occasions, get rid of Hamilton County data coaches. Well, they're doesn't help the general funds because they're in federal funds.
But then again, maybe we want to spend it on something else.
It could be, but it wasn't going to help us in the general fund.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I know it's been, another part of the conversation point, which maybe to Former Cross's point of having a better understanding of if you're providing multiple services, what are those varying different types of services you're providing? May note that some of those things we have to decide if that's what we want to do. And if we don't want to do it, then certainly we can invest in others. But if we still want to do it, it's kind of hard to be like, get rid of and keep doing
right
at the same time. But I think that gets a little bit into what we're supposed to do. I will want to commend, and I think this is administration and the treasurer's office on one aspect of this, which is we did have the conversation 2 years ago, I think it was almost, about how much schools were doing things in ways to get resources because they had to, right? Because that was what they had to do to get it. And there's at least been a lot more conversation about how we're doing those processes and getting those processes cleaned up, which has also made us more aware of what they were doing. So I just want to give both offices a pat on the back for that, because I think that is something that's helped us with Title I dollar spending, helped us with, we were cleaning up what you can't buy in those rules that I know Mike and the team did a lot of educating on. But it also meant that we have a better understanding to what Cody's describing here of how are we having contracts being done? How are we having folks using resources that we probably didn't have in the same way a couple years ago?
And thank you for saying that, because it's been a long ride. But when I took over the department 10 years ago, the vision was to change us from, like slapping people's hands kind of culture to being a partner and a planner with our school partners and our departments. And I think we've finally arrived. You know, it's not always perfect, but it's definitely, and we're in a better situation. The culture on the second floor has certainly changed a lot, so, thank you for acknowledging that.
Anything else, Cody?
No, sir. That is all I have. Thank you.
Excellent job as always, Cody.
So if you'll advance 2 slides real
Yeah.
quick. Mike,
Do have two new CRAs. Bring before the committee, so. They are what they are. I will say these are, well, okay.
Great description there, Mike.
Yeah, yes. I will.
Do that, but
I will say, as we usually talk here and say, like, these things will
Helping
not
us.
be for, students in our district. These may have a potential. These are affordable living units. Of course, that's how they're advertised. So maybe potential that some of our students will end up living in some of these. So
and do you know if this made it into Monday night's treasurer's report?
that is a good question.
remember seeing
Thought
that.
so, but
We'll check.
so it might be March 10th instead of February 24th.
The next thing on the agenda was the annual comprehensive financial report, which was already given out to all the board members, so.
Yes, and it was just we just wanted to announce that it had been given out, so.
Okay, thank you. And it does include an unmodified audit opinion,
And it is available on our website.
yes,
So,
and it's
if anybody
beautiful.
wants a
Dig in,
digital
dig
copy,
in.
yeah.
Hard to understand, but feel free to read it.
Alrighty. So as we keep moving through, I think the next thing on the agenda was the budget update, and then also reference to the survey that was done.
Right, so as I said, we're halfway through the budget cycle, working on central office priorities, waiting for survey results. So I presented to the LSD district-wide LSDMC meeting on Wednesday night. And then the next day is when they kicked off the survey, so they were hoping to get results back on Monday so we can share Monday night with the board. So that'll help direct some of our next steps.
The virtual.
Yes, thank you. And so Monday night, we're also announcing, and we're pre-announcing here that Superintendent Murphy and I came up with 4 different, yes. Public engagement sessions, starting with next Tuesday night's Just Ask Jen. We repurposed the topic to be around budget engagement. And then we've offered another evening, an afternoon and a morning session, bright and early, 7:30. So we're trying to capture everybody who, before, during, after work, so that we can capture as much diverse opinion as we can. And we'll share those results, as we get them.
I have a question about those. I think that's great, and I think it's good to have it multiple times. How long do you think those are you anticipating? Is that an hour? Is that 45 minutes? What is it?
We're scheduling 30 minutes. I'm sorry, Jen.
No, that's okay. So we scheduled them for an hour, but we were thinking, a couple minutes of presentation or conversation from one or both of us, and then just opening up for questions, just like we do with Just Ask Jen.
I think that's important so that it actually is engagement. I mean, as much as we're trying to share where we are, as little of that as you can,
Right.
just hitting the highlights, I think would be most useful. And looking back at some of the other engagement stuff that you guys have done or we've done, there's been some good ones. The questions to ask people. So it'd be great to review some of those. I came across one about, I don't know, what would be your big ideas, or are there questions you have? Yeah, we try to deal with that. What are your recommendations? You're famous untouchables, but I think.
I haven't received any yet, so there's none.
I just think very, very strongly that we need very directed questioning instead of necessarily open air time. I think it'd be important.
Okay, given commitments for Monday and Just Ask Jen is Tuesday, we'll do our best to get it together before then.
And again, other part too, updating us with regard to the timeline is we're at the stage, I think you mentioned it earlier, we're getting ready to get into central office budgeting as well. And so I do think one of the things that will be important for us as we keep going forward as a board is that we will have to make sure that we are again giving full direction and answers probably quicker now as we get closer and closer towards the date so we can get this done by June, end of June. But just making sure that as we have time at board meetings, I think Vice President Bowen has said this a couple of times in more recent past, that dedicating more time to getting those answers out of the board at some of our board meetings as opposed to some of the other things that we have slated in times to do, and spending a little bit more time getting a clear answer. And I think this is important also because we've made some substantial changes to parts of our district, and we want to be able to figure out and make sure that we're giving a clear answer to X, Y, and Z, so that when the administration comes in and says, here's what we plan to budget for, and we go and say, yep, that's in line with what we kind of gave directive on, or if we haven't given any directive, it makes it really hard for them to do that. So
I think it's time for a lot of things to be put in the parking lot as we try to make this deadline regarding the budget and the deadline for negotiations. Many of the things we tend to talk about are not necessarily things that are going to drive that deadline.
Mhm.
And I think that as much as finance can help do that, I think would be beneficial for all of us.
And again, that's on us as a board to do our homework before we show up. To be prepared to move through parts of the conversations quickly so that we have time to do the other things that are necessary to keep us moving. And also for us to make the hard choices. And I know that's something Treasurer Wagner's been saying since I've been on the board at least, that we got to start actually making decisions on things that we just can't do anymore and things that we can't do in the same way we did before. Because dollars don't seem to go down when people want to get paid to do or get charges to do. And that includes some of the stuff we're going to talk about when it comes to the levy about future years. You know, there's things we need to do that we got to figure out a way to pay for it in the future.
You're absolutely right, and we're in a very opportune time too, because at least in the last year and a half, whether we agreed with all of it or some of it or any of it or whatever, at least we have made the effort to redesign what we've been doing. And it may be good, it may be bad, but at least there's been an effort to restructure the place. And we couldn't do all these things, you know, there, here, and there, if indeed we kept having the same auto to drive. But I came across a piece of paper. It's from 2016, 2017. And it's just a list of the magnet schools that had either West Side or East Side or district-wide pull. And we've basically eliminated 10 of them. I mean, since then. So there's just, we have to keep reshaping ourselves and rethinking ourselves.
There's a lot of change, but with change comes important decisions.
Absolutely.
Anything else on the budget, at least for where we are right now, in the standpoint of discussions?
I have a worry, a concern, just the interfacing of the budget and negotiations.
Sure.
Because the negotiations have to be as monumental and as big as all this other has been, and yet there's such a short timeline. And if we don't have a big decisions on the negotiations, the kinds of cuts that we would have to do to even be able to have a successful negotiations.
I think that's why it's important for the team of folks who are working on that to get clear direction as to things that we're going to do and things we're not willing to do as a board, and things we're willing to hold fast on. What are our things that we will refuse to kind of not refuse to do or refuse to not do, or things that we feel are important to do. And I think that's also why our partners who are on the other side of the table are really also thinking about their roles in the district and working with us in that discussion, because I think you don't negotiate by yourself, right? And so everybody's at the table, everybody's bringing things to make the district better. And that's how we've always improved, right? That we've never done it by simply the board do a decision and then those other folks on the other side of the table take it. It's always been about us talking through how do we improve the equality. And that's why, but again, I think to your point, it's important for the board to give some direction sooner with negotiations to ensure that our budget decisions are reflective of those things as well. Want to move a little bit further to just talking about levy planning. I had put a document out there that was really just some ideas I had floated around and thought about as a plan, but not necessarily something we would do or have to do or perfect way to think about it. And I know the treasurer had mentioned having some conversations with regards to strategies around these upcoming potential levies and other financing methodology. And so I don't know if you want to start first or you want me to throw out the.
Well, what I could say is that Mike and I met with Brenda Weimer, David Conley and Kent Cashel all at the same time. And we came up,
Brain power.
yes. Because there's some creative ideas and we wanted to make sure they were legal with Brenda at the room. And so we've captured that and we were preparing to present that Monday night. And have costed out some of those concepts. So you do have the ability to so issue number one is the $48 million and the operational need, right? Issue number two is how to fund the facility repair plan. So one concept is that you could do a smaller PI levy and then borrow against the future earnings of that PI levy to ramp up your efforts. And then, so that could start things sooner. And then same situation with the bond levy. So it would definitely be a smaller, it would be like a reduction in taxes when that bond levy expires and then we ask the voters to replace it with for smaller projects. We also costed out the benefits of income tax levy and what that would generate in funds for us. It shifts the burden and not just income tax, but only on earned income taxes. So those, the seniors that are on, thank you. Fixed income is what I was trying to think of, wouldn't have to pay in. And so, it, you know, a smaller revenue cycle, but it's something to consider instead of just constantly going after property taxes. Something, it diversifies your revenue portfolio a little bit. So we're in the process of trying to finish the slide deck so we can send it to the board for review before Monday night.
Well, I guess we should keep moving so you have time, but I'll throw it out. Just the idea that I threw out there for folks to think about is really a 3-step approach, and it's actually very much in line with that thought process, which is realistically thinking about it as the first step in funding our district is this immediate levy. The second step is a levy to get us to the larger FMP, right? And that larger FMP process is something we would build, and I've heard Vice President Bolton talk about before, in the past, building a group of people together to do the FMP. I think that's something we should be doing in a strategy. And I know, again, also some of the folks in the administration have talked about us doing some planning and stuff so that once we have an FMP, we're ready to go and not having to kind of wait to do that. I think my thought was that, and Rob, you can kind of progress through these, but like you don't have to because you have to go that far. But here we go. The thought was like my thing of doing it as all one big group though is that the hope was that we would be able to touch every school by doing this in some form or fashion, so that it's showing a collective thing within the district, and it's not something that it's like we're doing only certain schools. I think that's one of the things that we did feel a little bit of, and I know Bolton and I were in a meeting where it was a little bit of a conversation around why does this school get everything all the time kind of feel to it. But there'll be something we would be able to add a benefit to every school. Whether that is construction, whether that's repairs, whether that's support and staff, whatever. And then also at the end of the day, building up quality pre-K is still a priority to us as far as this next levy coming up, building up some of the operational needs and being able to keep our buildings safe. So we are not in a position that some of the other areas around us are dealing with, which are buildings that are falling apart or buildings that are a danger to the students. So I did it in 3 steps. You can click to the next slide, Rob. The first one was about the operational levy. The second one was about a kind of planning process. And then the last step is the new FMP. And so, if you're,
Help me out,
Yeah.
on that. The operational levy is the 48 million?
yes.
And then the second one is,
Second step would be both the like a PI levy or whatever we decide to do to sustain us to get to the larger FMP for the big projects. So that would be doing something, both including the repairs that we need to do to buildings to kind of keep them in good working condition, but also building in some funding to support the idea of doing the planning part, doing community engagement, doing all the stuff to build what we need to do for the FMP.
so the new FMP is that if we get to 30 and the
Yeah.
old FMP is gone,
Yes.
which that will sell like hotcakes.
And like, so, like, if we look at the first part, I just threw an idea out there with if you want to click to the next slide, Rob. These are numbers that I just came up with in my head, but these are not necessarily numbers we would go with as a board. We always can decide what we want to do with the amount. But realistically, and I think this also may be something we at some point need to discuss with regard to preschool is what is the spend we are seeing and what may be the estimated spend that we would need based on the way our contract is set up, because I do know we've not seen the same administrative spend. I think it was the last, as we had seen in some previous years, but that may be just because they're filling roles and other things, that administrative turnover kind of deal. But this first year would just be about, getting us in a good fiscal order with regards to the needs for our operational needs.
But just for preschool operations.
Well, and our district operational needs. So we would
Okay.
we can expand a little bit on the district operational needs up front to kind of address things like the money we would need for the cash balance or things like that we as a district are going to have to do at some point to in order to be able to sustain ourselves. And again, also depending on state levels and that type of what the state funding model looks like, some of the things that if we don't do it, we're going to be cutting 20-30 million out of our budget kind of deals. And so just trying to find ways to look at what we would do as the first, as this operational levy is the first thing we have to deal with.
Right.
Rob, if you go to the next slide. No.
So that's a proposal for this levy coming in November, asking for more money.
That my thought process in this, was be that first one. And again, because in part, we've done this on a couple other levies recently, actually, that hasn't necessarily been hard to swallow in some ways, but it's also because we do need more for things like if we're going to do the cash balances, if we're going to address some of the things like the negotiations and the increases in resources and costs that come into the district on our normal operation. So if we just did the same things, even at the same level, they cost more the next year than they did the year before. And so I think Kevin, you spoke to this a little bit also about the buying power of 48 million. We'd actually need more than what I put down. So, because doing the buying power of 48 million really is 64 million. That's still more.
Then add the new needs.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Because the difference here is $12 million for operations, for CPS operations, and that's not gonna spread very far.
that's what I said.
on the new stuff.
I gave a number. I don't know that's the number that we go with or that's the number we need, but I thought the first part is that we do need to increase the operational levy. Again, it's something the board has to make a decision on and give direction on, so it's not something.
And then
Set
think
in
about the
stone.
time, either go to 10 years ago continuing.
But those are all the first part, right? So the first part is to deal with the operational levy. And then the second part is to look at some type of facilities repair levy that really is focused on those needs that are the roofs that we need to fix, the HVAC units that we need to fix, the buildings that have walls and painting and whatever that needs to be done. We got a whole list of it from oh, you're right.
That's okay.
We got a list of
Usually
it.
Nice.
Oh, yeah, we had a list of it from Mr. Burkhardt, who gave us a number of things that need to be done in the buildings, and that's part of it. That's the first half of it is really, let's keep our buildings that we can keep them in together in good condition. But the second part of that second stage, which is the next slide there, Rob, was really building up community engagement around an FMP. So beginning a committee to work to to build what our FNP would look like. Talking about how getting feedback on what are needs at the schools, what are the needs of the buildings, what are areas, for instance, we've had a large conversation about we need another building on the west side. Right? But how do we do that? What are the needs of that building? What are the programming needs that they might want in that building? What are the things that they would want to see in each of our schools? There may be some needs to adjust some of the programming needs or things like we've already committed to doing automotive and some other stuff with regards to career tech. How do people want to think about that? How do people want to be a part of that conversation of what the district looks like? I think this is also a way to get community feedback early. So this would be a multi-year approach to getting feedback that really allows us to get a better understanding, be able to communicate with the public, to get a lot of buy-in before we come to them and say, we now have this new FNP need. And that, to me, is also getting the board to approve some stuff before we go out and ultimately say, this is what our FNP is. It'd be more collaborative. It feels a little bit more in line with what I've heard described as what some of the processes that were done in the past to think about a larger FNP. And then the ultimate goal of that would be to have the big plan at the very end of that. Like as we walk into 2030, what is our big plan for the district? And so that would be, Rob, I'm going to click to the next slide, would be whatever that new bond levy looks like to support this FNP. They already have the community input and support and thought behind it. You would identify the major construction projects that need to be done. That would be part of that. That would be what we're building up for, have all the specific connections to student achievement. So by doing this, our students will be able to learn better in a space, they'll be grow better, we'll have these programming needs that be met for them. It will really connect up the work that we do for structure, for buildings and all this other stuff to how the students will achieve and grow. And we'll see better results. And I think that's the other part to it that we often don't get as much of a conversation point around. And I think that's maybe I think Dr. Moffitt spoke a lot about this, but that may be part of what we can build that conversation around is how does the work we did to build up skills resulted in our students being able to learn, grow, and do more than they walked in. And I also thought this is another great way. There's some programming things that we could be doing, and I tagged into the superintendent's point of beyond the tassel, because I do think that helps us with career tech, especially. What are those molds and models that we can think about that not only gets them able to do the career tech assessment for their particular areas, but then also might give them an opportunity to do jobs, coordinate with some of the local businesses to build up programmatic needs, internships, externships, all these things that we could be doing in that planning phase. That really, if we're needing to make changes to a facility to do that, that's the FNP, right? Like that's part of what the FNP would also be preparing us for. So if you need a medical lab in a building, this makes sense to do that as part of an FNP as opposed to us trying to find like an individual source to do that one-off. But that's like, again, all of this is for me was just a way my brain was thinking about it and put it out there for us to talk about as one collective effort to touch every school, to build every school up.
And I think finance ought to spend the next month, spending more time talking about this. I think we can find some coalition, coalescing around it. What do you have for 26?
So in 26, probably want to go back to, I think it's two things. One is the levy for the facilities repair is one part of 26. And then I think 26 also kicks off the discussion around what do we have in the district first off, and then what do we need? What do parents and community members need? Where we can get partnerships? What do they need to be able to partner with us? That there's two steps that go in that 26 fiscal year 26 as we're operating as academic year. Things we would do in that year to start the process that would grow over the next 3 or 4 years.
I think you meant 26 ballot. So what you're asking?
There would be the facilities.
Probably the PI levy would be your best bet.
And the difference between that and a bond and a whatever, did you explain that?
A permanent improvement levy is an annual revenue stream, sized dollar value wise to fund whatever you need for your repair plan on that particular year. A bond levy is a borrowing, so you get immediate cash flow, but then you have debt that you have to pay back.
The other part is I shared the same idea that that you all had discussion around with is I would almost rather do a slightly smaller PI levy to do a slightly less small bond levy at the end.
Mhm.
If the bond levy if those needs are, we can make it to that point.
Right.
So PI levy would increase taxpayers' obligations.
That's correct.
And a PI levy can be used for,
Projects that have a life of 5 years or more,
like,
assets that have a life of 5 years or more. So either buying, fixing,
okay,
but cannot be used for operations.
So you
cannot be used for operations.
So right, an
But it
operational
can
levy,
buy you things that you would be buying using your general fund, possibly. I
there
don't know,
isn't room in the
computers.
general fund to do it. That's why.
Yeah.
But so PI levy you can only use on improvements. An
Right.
operational levy you can use on operations and improvements. So you might even go for bigger operational levy. I don't know. But that's the difference.
So you said you had a meeting with 3 folks that are levy experts?
Yeah, so
And-
Brenda Weimer is our bond counsel. David Conley is our financial advisor. And Kent Cashel used to be an employee who is an underwriter. And so and they do a lot of financing for school districts. So they have done some creative stuff and have long-term really good advice to the district. They're very loyal and committed to the district.
So did they have any sense that the taxpayers are open
They
to
don't-
paying more?
Aren't experts.
I mean,
Can-
don't we have to get some assessment of whether or not our community, if we're going to try to build support, would we get it? I mean,
Typically the business community has helped do some surveying. We can't spend general fund, we can't spend our money on those kinds of efforts.
Mm.
But other organizations can and have done that in the past. And so we can, I'm actually scheduled to go down and talk to the CRBC next week, I think, to give an update. So I can test the waters in that respect.
I think that to also gaining or gathering whether or not we have support, I think that is in part also why some of the things like completing our negotiations so that we can then partner with the folks who we normally would be having at the table as we build these things. Having others, having a better understanding of what we're going to do with some of the other things. So we actually have something to give to them to say, this is what we need funds for. Do you think we would be able to be successful?
My quick look at that is that I don't think you're gonna have to, when the big FMP is paid off, which is 31, whatever,
December 1st of 31.
31. So that works, so it's 32 basically.
Mhm.
For all intents and
Fiscal
purposes.
year 2032, yes.
Okay. So you're not gonna need to have a really big. Let's think and rethink everything necessarily, because paying that thing off in a generation is going to create such goodwill and make us look so good that I don't think you have to really dig that deep for that one.
Mhm.
I think you have to dig deeper in the beginning of this thing. I'm telling you, I don't have any confidence that the preschool thing is gonna pass. When you just look out there in the world, regardless of how positive our people are and how the city comes through for us and our outlying areas don't come through for us. I worry about the preschool one, and I think I like going and doing something in 26. We need that.
Mhm.
Or to even get us to 32. But I think there's also on that front loading, besides the facilities piece that we need to do, first things first. In Cincinnati, you do the conservative thing first, you need to fix things before you necessarily build new things. I think we need some new things too, to your point about different schools getting certain things. So I like that 26 before the valuation starts in 27. But I think these are good steps.
Also recognizing we do have a levy that comes up in, I think it's 28.
28, yeah.
And so
65 million.
part of the thought process, at least in my head, is getting these first two things done early while we
Mhm.
still have, and in some ways, this might be the year to do a larger, only because of how much people are recognizing the cost that is coming to them of everything else not happening, right? So like so many people are looking at it and saying, we're not investing in this, or taking a lot of things from their, I mean, I don't think it's a good thing what we're
I
doing at
think
the
that
federal
helps
government
us
level.
for 26. I'm not sure if it
Um,
helps us right now, but
and
I
again, that's-
agree with you, yeah.
That's, you know,
I agree.
difference of opinion in some
I agree.
ways, but like, I think
Yeah.
that's part of why, in some ways, the idea, the long-term thought from my thought is that we have to have something that is more than just one at a time. And that was more to my point of doing this, is that
Thing.
if we only bring one at a time to each,
Mhm.
they're going to look at it and go, you're coming back again. And now you're coming back again. And now in 28, you came back another time. And now in 31 or whatever, we're gonna come back again. And like, in some ways of us putting a big plan together that we're able to talk through with them to the community early and say, we're doing this in stages, so we're not hitting you all at once. We're coming at you in phases so that we can make sure that it's minimizing the effect on our voters. And then we have a plan that works. And I think that's one of the questions, Jenna, I don't know what the appetite is in any of it, to be quite honest,
Right.
because I think our community is very fatigued on a lot of things right now. And so gauging their interests today might be very different than gauging their interests 2 months from now, but I do think we need to have some type of plan.
I think this is great. I mean, I think it is a huge plan. I think it is an 8-year plan. And we start sharing that plan now, and that 8 number is important. From a standpoint is every time we speak, we need to say, we've waited, this is, I don't know, there's been 2 times now, 8 years
Mhm.
for new money. 8 years for new money, but I do think the ESSER thing screws us over a little bit about that, because people think we have all that money. So that's another reason I worry about the front side of this plan. I think this is a great plan. But, I think, I'm not that worried about the end game because of the facilities master plan. That was such a culture shock and huge thing for everybody. To be proud of that would be, that'll sell itself, but boy, this early part, what can we do? And what would really, like you say, something for every school, even there, might really help.
Jen, when you're downtown, I'd be
Uh-huh.
interested to see if they talk much about the preschool. If you can get a read on their,
I'll report out. Mhm.
I do think that's also, again, having preschool promise is a wonderful video that they presented to us in November, I think it was when they were here. That very much is a touching video. Like it really hits on why, like this, a kid sitting there saying, I'm so happy to see my sister get to go through the same program I got to go through to learn. Like it really is a touching thing that I think is part of the messaging to your question, is that if we do not have a good messaging path to get us there, to touch on what we're doing in the schools, why we need to do some of these things, why we're looking out for our students. I mean, I think, again, things like talking about the amount of work we do with our students who are multilingual learners, talking about the amount of students who are walking in today who are homeless and who have these other needs. It really hit we were talking with city council, every time we've talked about our students who are through Project Connect or getting services for being low income, they're blown away by the amount of the students in our district who are from economically disadvantaged households. We say it every single time, but I don't think people realize, and that's part of the thing about urban districts too, right? Like we deal with every kid who comes in, whereas some of these other districts, the profile of the kid doesn't change a whole lot.
And I think that 26 date helps us, with the 26 date, because the preschool thing is still, and Jen always gets mad when I call it preschool, and it's that 48 million, that is so,
No, I get that when you
Narrow.
call it the CPP,
yeah,
because it's shared, it's a preschool expansion.
right. But it's a specific thing. People don't even know or care about the operational part of it. Unfortunately, it's been so labeled as only that one thing.
Right.
And that's how the voters see it. And whereas we've got like you're saying, we could be pushing the homeless piece, the kids that need so much help, immigrant population, all the things that we've been doing. Yeah, I think, I'll be interested to see what CRBC says about preschool, because I'm not hearing.
yeah, I think too, the new method where it's based on enrollment, the preschool method, that is something we need to highlight for the future as well. And, you know, we should be able to get results or outcomes of the preschool the last few years. How does it improve third grade reading, and which programs did better in that regard? There might be some messaging around that could be helpful.
I know the superintendent has mentioned that we do have some information for our students, at least on some of those results. I know the kindergarten readiness is one that we presented on.
Right.
And we're able to demonstrate the growth. We also saw a growth number of students who've gone from our pre-K through K through 6, right? So like, I think those are also things that we can ask the administration to do. But again, like for me, this was
I think it's great.
putting the conversation out there for us to start talking about it. We've talked around what do we want to do for levies a lot, and we've never given a clear conversation to it. So I think this is my effort to get us to think about it.
Good,
Well,
good job, Brandon.
We also have some board members that don't talk about that yet, and it's like, you know, we have this is when we gotta talk about it.
Yeah.
The last topic on our agenda was for this meeting is, or no, I'm sorry, 2. One is one that we keep pushing, so I want to make sure we at least save some time for someone to enjoy it. But one is the work plan. We put a draft version up with some of the additional updated dates.
I think there's even a newer version, because Mike and I made edits to it. I don't
Okay.
think got captured in this printed copy.
And
So it's in the shared copy that we have.
yeah, and so some of this is also because our administrative staff both were out of the office today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so they try to do a lot of stuff early, which meant they didn't necessarily catch all of the most updated things. So what I would maybe suggest is we can send it out to the board members to take a review and make some edits, make some changes on corrections. But essentially, if there are new things we want to add in or new thoughts we had in this meeting, I'm happy to capture some of those thoughts, and then we can always just sit
I
down.
just have a general thing looking at and I didn't look at what
Mhm.
this new thing, and it may already capture it. But this, I mean, we took some great time naming this committee. And I do think that it's you know, it's what, budget, finance and growth. I think we spend, certainly, it seems, at least I remember from the year before last, when I was on finance, we spend 80% or 90% of our time on finance. I don't think we spend as much time. I start to see it now with return on investment is starting to be about the budget.
Mhm.
And I know that the whole growth piece needs to go before the whole board, but I do think that there's some of the, I just think whether it's enrollment or the impact of enrollment on state funding or what have you, I would like to see us spend a little bit more time on those two parts, even just the title, budget and growth. Rather quite, I mean, I think to the point that Jen made, we've done some great work on processes and culture and how to do different things that we're doing. And I feel that we've spent, and so that time we've spent has made some great progress. But I'd just like to see more on budget. And I think the board needs the finance committee to spend more time on budget when we have both the superintendent and the treasurer in tow in this committee, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think that would be useful.
And I know this past year we spent, you know, we made it a part of our meetings each time. I think the difficulty was always that it's hard to do budget conversations when the board hasn't given any directives. So
Oh, yeah,
it's,
I
we
think
can have the conversation absolutely from here, and we can start putting some thoughts and stuff out to the table to really push that conversation to your point.
1,000 years ago, finance did a lot more in helping direct the board in coming up. When you have 7 people trying to give direction about a budget, when we've spent the time and, you know, I think that would help us. I think
We
They
gladly
would
do
help
more
us.
of it if it changed our behaviors.
I find this to be really helpful to me in terms of thinking and setting some direction from the work plan today. Okay, this is where the finance committee is going, from your thoughts around the levy. So what do I need to demonstrate on the instructional side
Mhm.
to help people believe in us on the front end? And so we can then tell the story all the way through these next 5, 6 years. So I find this extremely helpful. Jen and I don't have a lot of time to sit together, but for me, this has been helpful.
Again, I think you guys, Jen knows that I've sat there and said we need to be doing more on budget, so I'm happy to have that added in.
Yeah.
And I think,
Say that.
I think that's an actually, absolutely great way to do it. And then I think also tapping into some of the stuff that Cody and others have done, talks about how these things get implemented into our budget for future years, right? So we say that we recognize it's great spending habit, but maybe this one wasn't great, so now we gotta change our budget thought process.
That's right, and I
All those.
hesitate to say this because the other four board members that are on this committee. But this committee will have the greatest impact on whether or not your plan
Yeah, could
is
be.
gonna work. I mean, it is. I mean, that because it's all, every time you go out, you can say all the good stuff you wanna say, but if we look like we are financially solvent and thinking ahead, that makes all the difference in the world.
But yeah, I don't know, Jim, if you had any thoughts on the work plan
In it-
itself?
Well, I think, I thank you for putting that longer term
Yes.
plan together, and I think it's a good idea to not be talking about individual levies, but a long-term plan and how these levies fit in. And it's going to take a lot of communication and a lot of messaging, and it's going to take a lot of ROI kind of talk. So that we're talking about what benefits the city as a whole, having a strong public school system. I think that I'm a little nervous about asking for new money this November. I almost feel like we're almost too late with that messaging, especially after we've had a pretty big increase in taxes regarding the auditor's reevaluation of all the properties. I mean, people are already paying more taxes. So I'm worried about that component. Not that we don't need it.
Mhm.
I'm worried about whether the appetite is there to support us. I do think, though, with your longer term plan that you're suggesting, 26 and future years, I think asking for new money, our chances might be better, like with the PI levy or whatever we need to do in that regard. So it's just kind of my thoughts about all this.
Yeah.
But
And again, I think there may be time for Jen, we can certainly have some education also on again, repeating and what types of levies we can do as part of these things, as part of the conversation, but yeah.
I was just gonna say, I'm getting ready to send the slide deck out the way it is. I'm still waiting on some information from food services because part of the state bill has a change in the way they're gonna calculate poverty. That's probably gonna hurt us. So she's calculating what that impact will be. I'm gonna go ahead and send the slide deck as it is. It might be tweaking, but between now and Monday, but at least you'll have something to look at. There is language in there about the levy information. I hear what you're saying about delaying for new money, but you need new operational money and new PI money. So you're either you can't, if you do two levies into 1 year, one's gonna fail. And so which takes the higher priority. And I'm not sure we can wait for new money in another year. So, but we can talk more about that on Monday.
yeah, if we propose a levy and we're asking for new money, isn't it kind of all or nothing? I mean, if the levy fails, don't we get zipped?
Well, we get another opportunity to pass it. So you can always go back to the old.
So I don't know.
It's just true.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know, that's a thought in my head.
yeah,
It's a gamble.
it is.
If I will say this is the last thought on this, but my little last on this, but if we are choosing not to go with higher money, then we need to make harder cuts this year.
Absolutely.
And I honestly don't think we will do it. We haven't done it. We haven't been committed to doing it. We refuse to make hard cuts. This is why we had to tip into the cash balance this year. So if we're committing to doing that, let's be honest about what we're committing to doing, which is that we're going to make a substantial amount of hard cuts that people are not going to like and that they are going to come and say, don't do.
And I just saw a slide that Mike and Kevin put in here that the state sent this forecasted simulation software has been updated. We're gonna lose another $10 million in state share next year. So even my $624 million is gonna drop by 10 million. That's another 10 million we gotta cut. So, and Shauna's having a heart attack about now. And so, it's, what I
And we have
wanted to say this
negotiations.
morning at the legislative breakfast is if we don't fix these problems and the state continues not to make public education a priority financially, what are you gonna do when we close our doors? Where are all these kids gonna
They
go?
want us to.
I know, but the receiving entities are not prepared for that
They
eventuality.
want to not pay us. They don't want us to close the doors. They want their
Right.
kids to sit in our buildings with no resources.
Seriously, we
They
just
don't
have
want our
to,
kids to have to go to the suburbs.
we're gonna have to be bare bones. I
See,
mean, it's
yeah,
emotionally
we'll
difficult.
see, we'll see. But help me out with this thing that you and Mike learned in Columbus regarding our buildings.
So there's language in the state budget, and we're gonna talk about this Monday night for the whole board,
I
but
know,
there's
preview here.
there's
so we
language-
Don't have a nervous breakdown.
There's language in the governor's bill that says if your property that was used over, and help me if I make this wrong, if it was used for instruction over the last 10 years and it's not at 60% of enrollment, either your FMP measure of enrollment or the highest over the last 3 years, if you're not at 60% capacity, then you got to put it up for sale. First offered to local charter school, high performing charter schools that are district. And then after 60 or 90 days, I forget how many days, then if they don't buy it, then you offer it to the other high outside district ones, but only at not the fair market value, what it is now. It's at the instructional value, which is a much lower. We'll lose big money if we are forced to do that. Now, this is a bigger concern for Cleveland and Columbus because they have a lot of really small schools and vacant buildings.
Cincinnati Public does over the last 15 years.
Right, and so, I'm really
System was
anxious to see how the fall enrollment. Of course, I won't be here, but
But
Mike will be anxious to
That's
see,
right.
and in the future treasurer's department, we'll look at, the enrollment. Has it settled out as a reorganization? I'm anticipating a loss of enrollment because change is hard. And people react to that. They may come back, but initially I think we'll see,
well, we've been losing, so
well, we lost last year with change, so, and that'll impact us in that year because enrollment now, even though they use a 3-year for the base cost to calculate enrollment, to calculate funding, when they apply the base cost, it's to the current year enrollment. And so if you've dropped, that hits you immediately. And so I'm nervous. I'm really concerned, really, really concerned. So, we will fight. So that's the language on the state, and I've asked Dan to look at it. The treasurers group put together some amended offering a language,
right.
and both Senator Blessing and Isaacson have agreed to help us promote that language. At least in a 10-minute or a 5-minute
okay.
conversation we had this morning, but they're supportive. And so we're going to try to go out with one big voice from the urbans because the urban districts are going to get really hurt. They're also thinking about changing the way they do poverty, which is going to hurt us all. If they don't update the base costs, so if they want to continue to use 2022 average costs, when I applied, we put a slide in there that that has a $200 million impact on us just for our teachers. So because we're already above the state share and we only get 36% of the state share.
Yeah.
So there's that bigger gap. So it's a $73,000 per teacher funding gap. Multiply it times 2,800 teachers, that's $218 million. So, and that's just teachers. And so we didn't look at the rest of the staff, but, so them not fully funding the formula is going to be very detrimental to the urbans at least.
I just, as you're talking, I was just thinking, if we don't go for new money, we're gonna have to make major cuts. If we do go for no money and we don't get it, we're gonna have to make major cuts. So we kind of have to prepare for that.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes.
Um,
Because remember that certification language.
Yep.
We have to show, and if I show a negative in that the first 3-year window, ODE comes trotting down here to says, how are you going to do? What are you going to do to balance? And you
Right.
can't use a new levy as your reason. So you have to show the cuts. And if you can't make it, then they come in and start making decisions for us on how we spend money.
For executive session, I did ask them to add the sale of property. I know you guys can't probably on Monday get enough people together, whether it's Jeremy and Mike and you or whomever and Dan, to actually give us an idea as to what buildings those would be. We wouldn't want to, that's a value in executive session to talk about property. But I mean, you already know that Cleveland and Columbus is in worse shape than we are.
Yeah.
And people, as
There's-
we did this whole growth thing for the last 2.5 years, people sitting on you're making that up, you're making that up. No, we're not making it up.
No, it's stronger language. I don't know, based on what I know about the projections that were being made,
Yeah,
I can't think of any school would qualify. And what I used to think, I was afraid the Ed Center would qualify because it used to be Mary Middle School, but we haven't used it as instruction in 10
school,
years,
yeah.
right?
Jacobs.
Jacobs might be a
Jacobs,
problem.
we need to blow it up.
Which, you
Well, we
know,
have
if somebody
to-
wants to buy Jacobs Center.
Well,
Yeah.
we don't want to lose it.
But I think these are all things that as a board is important for us to talk about. I don't know that necessarily spending too much more time here
Right.
But
talking
when was
about
the
it.
last time we used Jacob Center as an instructional? It was during
Today,
swing
the flood.
space. That was temporary. though.
Continuous.
That's right.
We used,
Has it been?
yeah, so that might be off the table. That we really have to analyze. I doubt we'd be able to get it done by Monday night.
No, I'm sure, it's what I said in the beginning. I doubt that you could do that, but I do
Okay.
think it would be great to have a work group to figure that.
Yeah,
start to
absolutely.
Figure it out,
We talked about that.
as well as all this other stuff about IRNs and what have you, since we're moving people around to different buildings and is that, all that kind of stuff, because the other piece is also the low performing piece. So
Fun
we
of
get
this
a lot of pressure from Florida, but lots of great challenges.
So only other thing to add is that well, first, is there anyone, Rob, that? Nope, cool. There's never usually. Okay,
Oh, good.
well, let me do just real quick and then I'll let Michelle, say it. We have planned on the agenda to add for next upcoming is the insurance update and the investment update. They're just the standard updates. Shouldn't take a lot of time, but they're just the standard information that's given. And then what we can do is bring back the work plan to finalize it at that meeting. Michelle.
Michelle Dunn with CFT. Just really quick, and I think I do this every month, but I just want to remind everyone that we also have a renegotiation on an ordinance as it relates to commercial property tax abatements with the city of Cincinnati. We have a currently negotiated percentage that we get a pilot payment back on commercial properties that receive abatements from the city. And, you know, word on the street has been there's some in the city who think CPS should not be getting any pilot payments back on commercial property in an effort to spur development. Of course, I'm sure everyone in this room disagrees with that analysis and feels, well, I could say all the way from my view, I think we should have 100% actually of the taxes that we are due on commercial property taxes. But in any case, the Board of Ed will have to negotiate with City Council on that ordinance. It expires December of 2025, and we are hopeful that you will go to the mat hard to make sure we retain that pilot percentage or even grow it to our benefit for our children. Thank you.
All right.
Excellent.
Well, with having no